Hi, everybody, and welcome to the class on meetings. So we're going to talk about how to have better meetings. In fact, we're not just going to talk about how to have better meetings, we're going to talk about how to have better meeting management, because that kind of seems to be the problem, right? That meetings are not well enough managed. When you think about it, maybe it's not just management. Maybe it's better meeting leadership. Getting people to lead meetings, and of course, all of you, if you're not already, you're going to be leading meetings shortly and throughout the rest of your careers. So let's talk about leadership, and you know what? Even that's not quite what we want to talk about. Really, what we want to talk about is better meeting action. Because at the end of the day, that's really what you want, right? If you have a meeting and you don't have actions come out of it, you didn't have a meeting. You had a conversation. So let's talk about how we could achieve better meeting action. So here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about bad meetings, maybe the single most important element of a good meeting, and voila, the Labash 5P way to meeting happiness. And then we'll do a little bit of step by step and talk about what we'd like to do next. So, when it comes to bad meetings, let's talk about two things. First of all, my worst meeting of all time, and second, what people want and don't want in or out of a meeting. So, my worst meeting of all time happened when, and this is funny, right? Because I've done like well over 15,000 meetings in my career. Don't look so horrified, because by the time you guys have had the career that I've had, you will have probably done more. And in fact, your meetings won't just be face-to-face meetings. There'll be probably a balance of face-to-face, virtual meetings, web meetings, teleconferences, web conferences, video conferences, Cisco telepresence, holographic meetings, Second Life meetings, meetings on other planets, God knows what. Anyway, my worst meeting happened when I was creative director at the ad agency, and this meeting occurred because at this particular time I was creative director of the headquarters office of Ketchum Advertising, and we had just kind of lost our Philadelphia creative director, our Chicago creative director, and our Washington, D.C. creative director. And so my boss thought it'd be a good idea for me to sort of cover all those offices as well as the headquarters office, which meant I was on airplanes a whole lot, but also meant that if there was any sort of business presentation anywhere, I was part of it. So one day we got a call in our Chicago office from Motorola. Now, this was fabulous, right? Because at this time, Motorola had just been named America's most admired company, and they had just won the Malcolm Baldrige Quality Award, which is wickedly hard to win. It's a very, very rigorous competition, and they had a lot of money. Stock was doing really well, so of course we were very interested in this, and we thought this would be awesome. But we didn't really know what we were going out to do. All we knew is it was codenamed Alex. And we had to sign a non-disclosure agreement before we went out. And beyond that, we didn't know anything. What we knew was we had to be there Thursday at 11 o'clock. So Thursday at 11 o'clock, we drive out to Schaumburg, Illinois from our headquarters in downtown Chicago. And the meeting's at 11, so we get there when? Right, we get there around 10:35, 10:40, plenty of time, right? So we get to the meeting and we go up to the receptionist and say, "Hi, we're the folks from Ketchum, and we're here for so and so's 11 o'clock meeting." And the receptionist says, "Okay, have a seat." So we have a seat and we're chattering, and there are three people here. There's Bob Croyer, who's the president of Ketchum Advertising USA, Jean Ann Matter, who's the director of research, and me, because I'm the creative director who's sort of covering the Chicago base. And we wait. It gets to be about 5 minutes to 11, and we say, we just want to make sure that meeting's at 11 o'clock, and we're here to do the meeting, and we just want to make sure that our host knows that we're here. And she says, "Well, I'll call." And so she calls back, and it's like, she says, he's aware. Okay, good. And we're waiting, and it's 11 o'clock. It's 11:01, and we go back up. We said, "Yeah, we just want to be sure that it is 11 o'clock, right? And we're here and everything." And she says, "Yeah, I'll call back again." So she calls back again. Now it's like 5 minutes after 11, and she says they're running a little bit late, so just hang on. So okay, we hang on. It's 11:10. It's 11:15. It's 11:20. Finally, our host comes out and he says, "Guys, I'm so sorry. We're running late on this other thing that we're doing, but we do want to talk about Alex. So come on back to the conference room and we'll talk about this." So we go back to the conference room, and big conference room. It's sort of boardroom size, and he opens the double doors that lead us in there, and it's like a scene from a movie. People are yelling at each other. They're throwing paper at each other. They're throwing pens at each other. There's three people talking over here. There's another heated discussion between four people over here. There's two people over here talking about something. And we kind of look, and our host says, we're just finishing up, so why don't you guys have a seat? Okay. So we sit. And I mean, remember, I run a creative department, right? So I'm used to rowdy. It doesn't usually throw me off my game. But I thought this was a little unusual. So in any event, we wait, like another 5, 7, 8 minutes go by, and our host finally stands up and he says, guys, why don't we table what we're talking about right now? The people from Ketchum are here, so I want to kind of turn it over to them because they're going to talk to us about Alex. And he sits down. And we're like, okay, and Bob Croyer gets up and he says, well, everybody, thank you very much. I'm Bob Croyer, president of Ketchum Advertising, and with me are Chris Labash, Gina and Matter. Obviously I'd love to tell you about the agency and how we think we can help you, but really we don't know very much about what Alex is, what the purpose is, and so forth. So we're going to have to look to you for some direction to help us understand how we might best be able to help you, beginning with, of course, what Alex is. And it turns out that at that point, there's just absolute silence. And then everybody starts talking at once, and it's the same thing again, where you got 4 people over here, 2 people over here, and 3 people over here. And what they're talking about, it turns out, is this. The very first Motorola flip phone. The thing that is going to revolutionize the way cellular telephony goes. And this is really interesting because, up to this point, cellular telephones have kind of looked like that. They're the brick, they're big, and they actually haven't changed that much since the very original cell phone call was made, and that's the original cell phone developer. The engineer's name is Martin Taylor, and he actually used that cell phone to call. He was at Motorola. He used that cell phone to call his counterpart at Bell Labs because it was like a race, right? I mean, it's like who's going to get there first, and he got there first, and of course he rubbed it in by using the cellular phone to call his competitor. In any event, the point here is this was going to revolutionize cellular telephony. This was awesome. What could be better than this? But, as we're going through the meeting, certain things are coming out, and we're learning a little bit here, a little bit there, and so forth. And ultimately, what happens is, it's lunchtime. Pizza's here. Okay, and the pizza comes in, and we go out. It's like our host says, guys, pizza's here, so I'm going to ask the Ketchum folks to go back, and we'll just look forward to their best thinking. And we get in the car and we drive back to headquarters. And as we're driving back, we're discussing the meeting and what our job is to do next, and how likely it is we're going to be able to accomplish that job. So think about what I have just said, and take a couple minutes and think about what you think might have gone wrong with the meeting, if anything. You may say, no, that meeting was perfect. That worked really, really well. So again, there's what we're talking about. The introduction of Alex, the first Motorola flip phone, the thing that actually, in many respects, revolutionized cellular telephony, and the meeting that ensued, and what our task was as we went back to the agency. So just think for a minute. Okay, I'm not actually going to give you a minute. I'm going to give you about that much time. But, really, what went wrong? Well, a whole lot went wrong, right? And you probably figured this out for yourself. First of all, the meeting started late. I mean, it didn't just start like 2 minutes late. It started 20 minutes late. But even 2 minutes would be too much, and I'll come to that in a little bit. There was also no real owner to the meeting. Our host is sort of a host, but he didn't really own the meeting, right? There wasn't an agenda that had been published that he was managing. And in fact, the meeting got out of control pretty quickly, right? I mean, there were side conversations here, there, and everywhere. Really, we didn't even get enough good direction right up front about what this was about, what we should come prepared to discuss, and so forth. But overall, the thing that hit me most, I think, was I just felt it was really unprofessional. And I had expected so much more because it was Motorola, America's most admired company, and so on and so forth. So I was a little disappointed. And in fact, I mean, the upshot of this is we did do some work for Motorola, but ultimately um, things got off track pretty quickly, and this project that we were supposed to be involved in introducing pretty quickly actually took a long, long time, and a variety of other things happened, and we wound up not being the agency of record for the introduction. So a lot of things went wrong, though, right in that initial meeting that, from my mind, or to my mind, threw everything off track. So here's what people don't want in meetings, according to a survey that Bradford Smart Associates did. And you're going to resonate with this, right? I mean, you know this. What people don't want in a meeting is they don't want it to drift from the subject. And you could argue that, the meeting that we had actually was never even on the subject, but certainly for the few moments that it did in fact drift from the subject. And in fact, in the SMART survey, like 83% of the people said, I hate it when that happens. 77% of the people said, people aren't prepared enough. And when they say poor preparation, they mean both the owner of the meeting, the manager of the meeting, and the participants of the meeting. So we'll talk about how to get around that a little bit. And then, 3/4 of the folks they had surveyed really just questioned, was this the best use of my time? And I'm betting you've probably felt the same thing, because many of us go to many meetings, and not all of the meetings are as effective as they might be. And so a lot of times you're in there thinking, I got real work to do, and I'm sitting here, right? I'm sitting here and I don't know why I'm sitting here. What people do want is they want participation. And again, how many times have you been in a meeting where one or two people talk and everybody else just kind of is sitting there, or they're like they pick up their iPhones and they're like, God knows what they're doing. They're playing Doodle Jump, or they're sending texts, or whatever. So participation is really important, because that's kind of the point of a meeting, right? The point of a meeting is to have participation. 2/3 of the folks said, I want to be clear on what the purpose is. And again, how many times have you gone into a meeting where it's kind of unclear why you're there? It's like, wait, what's this about? Or even worse, it's like you think it's about one thing, and then it's like, maybe it's about something else. And that really led to the third thing, the third of the big three, which is, I want people to address the agenda items that are supposed to be addressed, and I kind of get the feeling that they're not being addressed. So how do you give good meeting? Well, I've read a whole lot. I've read over really 1,000 different books, articles, websites, blogs, you name it, about giving good meeting. And still, the very best thing I have ever read was an article in the Harvard Business Review, March, April 1976, by a guy named Anthony Jay, and it's called How to Run a Meeting. And one of the observations he makes in this article is this. He says, the single most important element of a good meeting, and think about that for a minute. What do you think the single most important element of a good meeting would be? Just take a minute, think about that. Because what Jay says is the single most important element of a good meeting is that you be a servant of the meeting. And think for a minute about what that word means, servant. What he's talking about is not being subservient. He's talking about how can you best serve the meeting. It's ostensibly, it's a meeting that's been called by you or is being managed by you. How can you best serve the meeting? How can you best ensure that the meeting is going to be effective, that the meeting is going to be productive, that the meeting isn't going to be a waste of everybody's time? Well, to help you with that, let's think about a couple things. First of all, why do we meet? Think about that. Why do we meet at all? Why spend the time doing that? Well, there are a number of reasons, right? And the biggest one is that we're a social species. And this goes on species-wide, right? We like to connect with other people, and where possible, we like to do it face to face. And what's a meeting do? Well, it does a number of things. It defines a team. First of all, the very fact that we're in a meeting means that for at least the duration of that meeting, we're a team. We have something that we're supposed to do, and we are addressing it as a team to do it. The second thing it does, obviously, it modifies group knowledge. So if you're having a weekly status meeting, obviously every week you're modifying the knowledge of the group. People are participating, they're contributing, and they're saying, here's where we are in this project, or here's where we are on this other thing. And the last thing that it does is it helps to create commitment. Because when people are in a meeting, and we'll talk more about that today and in the argument, influence, and presentation class. When people are in a meeting, if they agree to something, particularly if they agree to something in front of their peers, they're actually more likely to be committed to it, more likely to get it done. So a meeting can have extremely positive effect on everybody, extremely positive outcomes. So why doesn't it so often? Why do we suck at meetings? Well, here I am to help you. Here's the Labash 5 P's of meeting happiness. So think about what you think the P's are. I mean, let's face it, I've given you some clues here, right? They begin with P. There are 5 of them. So think about what you think they might be. Well, probably you guessed one of the first ones, and that's we should know what the purpose of the meeting is. In fact, we should be spectacularly clear about what the purpose of getting together in a meeting is. The second P, very, very hard to have a meeting without people. Yeah, people have to be part of this, which doesn't just mean you invite random people willy-nilly, but you need to be very thoughtful about who's going to be attending this meeting and equally thoughtful about who's not going to be attending the meeting. The third P, well, it makes good sense, right? The idea of preparation, or sometimes I use the word paper, because preparation isn't just sort of getting mentally prepared for a meeting, it's knowing what to have done in advance of the meeting, what white paper to have read, or what minutes to have read, or what websites to have gone to, or what customers to have spoken with in advance of the meeting, so that everybody who's coming into the meeting is prepared and maybe has something to contribute. The fourth P, I mean, if you've got purpose, people, and preparation, well, that's pretty good. But again, it's still not going to be a meeting without, go ahead, say it. I know somebody had this in the back of their head. Participation. People have to participate in the meeting. Otherwise, it's kind of not a meeting, right? It's a monologue by one person, or a dialogue between one or two people, or whatever. And then the last P, and you might not get this, so I'll spot you this one, is what I call point. And point means, what do we want to walk out of the room with? What's our metric for success here? So if the purpose of the meeting is to find a new fire escape route from the building, the point of the meeting might be, we want a map. I want to be real clear about, here's the path to get out of the building. So when I set up the meeting, I can say, guys, our purpose today is to do whatever, to find a better fire escape route. What we want to walk out of the room with is a map or a checklist or whatever it happens to be. And that's an important thing to think about. What is that metric going to be? What is that point going to be? Is it a go, no-go decision about a new initiative? Is it doing a brainstorming meeting where we are going to identify our 5 best ideas that we want to move forward with? Is it any sort of decision about we're going to choose path A or path B? We want to be able to have some sort of decision, some sort of finite thing that we can say, yeah, that's what we want this meeting to do. That's what we want to walk out with. If we don't walk out with that, we didn't have a good meeting. And that's one of the things that leads a meeting to action, so that everybody right up front is aware of what the purpose is, but they're also aware of what the metric is. We walk out with this, good meeting, don't walk out with it, bad meeting. Okay? So let's talk about those a little more in detail as we go through the meeting step by step. What do you think is the absolute first thing you want to do when it comes to having a meeting? Okay, think about that. What is absolute step number 1? In fact, I'll tell you what, I'll help you out here. It's so important, I wouldn't even call it step number 1. I'd call it step number 0. So I'll help you with a hint here. And the hint is this. Probably nobody in your organization is like sitting in their office thinking, boy, I got nothing to do. Sure hope somebody calls a meeting today. So step number 0, do we really need a meeting? Is there another way to accomplish this? Could we do this another way? Could I send around a bunch of emails? Could we set up a wiki? Could I have a conversation with 3 people instead of a larger group? How else might you accomplish the same thing? So really, step number 0 is that. Ask yourself, is a meeting the best way to accomplish this? Then step 1, Yeah, you figured that part out. Step one is let's figure out the purpose. What is it we need to do here? And really, you need to think about two things. The first is, what are the critical issues that must be discussed? Okay? For this meeting to do any good, we have to address this one issue, or these two issues, or these three issues, or these four issues. More than that probably isn't going to make a whole lot of sense, but these are the things that we have to discuss. And then what are the critical success factors, the CSFs, to determine whether or not this is going to be a successful meeting? Well, a critical success factor would be we'd need these two people there. And another critical success factor would be this meeting has to occur before Friday. And you see what I mean? So you figure out what the critical success factors are, and then you can move to the second step, which is, yes, you guessed it. At that point, I know I need a meeting. I know what the purpose of the meeting is. Now I want to talk about what my agenda is going to be. An agenda is one of the most important things that you can do for a meeting, because really it's your roadmap. It's the thing that allows you to know whether or not you're on track, whether or not everybody is on task, and it helps your participants know what is expected of them in the meeting. So a couple guidelines about meeting agendas. The first is, yeah, generally it should be one page. If it's longer than one page, I start to think, well, I better pack a lunch for this meeting, right? So one page should be enough to detail what we're going to be talking about, who's going to be talking about it, how much time we're going to spend on it, and so forth. To that point, you want it to be kind of specific. You want to know what are the subjects that will be discussed, again, so that your participants can be ready. You also want to, as much as possible, sort of group things in some sort of logical order, which means maybe I want to talk about all the research issues at the same time, and all the marketing issues at the same time, and all the product development issues at the same time, and all the security issues at the same time, which makes sense unless there's some kind of hierarchical order that should be applied on top of that, meaning let's talk about the most important things first. Why? You know why. It's because if you're getting short on time, then at least you know you've covered the most important things. And then finally, a good idea here is for you as the meeting leader to not be the official scribe, to not be the official note taker, because it's just too hard. It's too hard for me to facilitate a meeting, to lead a meeting, and also take accurate notes. So, where possible, defer that to someone else, delegate that to someone else. I used to have my assistant come with me to the meetings that I led because she was a great note taker. She would take the notes and then she would disseminate them later. It also helps to have somebody, which could be the note taker or could be somebody else, keep track of time. So you really want somebody to give you a heads up when you're discussing one part of the meeting that, like, we got 5 more minutes to deal with this, so that you know how best to manage your and everybody else's time. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Okay? The third thing is you need to determine who's coming. Who am I going to invite? Okay? I've got to kind of figure out who makes the most sense to have there and who maybe I could kind of live without, right? And to do that, actually, when I started to teach this, I thought this was applicable. I used to skydive every weekend, and then, there's a logical progression. People who skydive, many of them start to say, wow, this is really expensive and I don't stay up in the air for very long. Maybe I should go take, flight training. Maybe I should go to flight school. So I went to flight school. And in flight school, one of the very first things that you learn are the 4 forces of flight. And the 4 forces of flight are lift, things that keep you up, gravity, the thing that holds you down, thrust, the thing that moves you forward, and drag, the thing that holds you back. And I thought it's kind of interesting because I think along those vectors, you can actually plot people. Certain people have a lot of lift and thrust. They bring a lot of energy to meetings. Other people have a lot of gravity and drag. They're the ones who, do all the cliches. They say, well, we did that once and it didn't work, and I'm not sure. We don't have the time. We couldn't have the money. You don't always get a choice, admittedly. But when you do get a choice, I like inviting people to my meetings who have a lot of thrust and lift, and as much as possible, avoid the people with a lot of gravity and drag. To that point, you should also think about, who do I have to have in this meeting, and who would just kind of be nice to have. One of the earliest lessons I got in meeting leadership came when it wasn't my boss, but it was the boss of this particular group, wanted to come to the meeting. And in a rare moment of clarity, I said, how about if you don't do that? Because if you come, it shades how people are going to talk, right? I mean, they're going to edit themselves because their boss is here, and they're not going to want to be critical of anything that's already gone on because you were the boss, and that whatever's gone on presumably had your endorsement. So think about who you have to have in a meeting and who would just be nice to have, and maybe who you'd really rather not have. And then finally, in terms of the number in a meeting, one of the things that Jay talks about is 100 people. 100 people isn't a meeting. 100 people is an assembly. 50 people. 50 people isn't a meeting. 50 people is like a tribal council. Really, when you're thinking about a meeting, one of the things that I think about is one of the things that the famous British economist E.F. Schumacher once said, which is any group larger than 10 spends most of its time managing itself, not the business at hand. So where possible, you want to keep your meetings to about 10. Smaller is even better. One of the things that you learn from doing focus groups, for example, is you have more than 10 people in a room, it's really, really hard to get everybody's participation. It's really, really hard to manage a group that size. So where you can, keep it about 10. The next thing to think about is, when am I going to do this? Okay, if you call your meeting for Friday at 4, you are not going to be very popular. And you probably know this from experience already, because I'm guessing you've probably been called into a meeting Friday at 4. It's not great. Where you can and when you can. And again, just like the participants, you don't always get the choice. But when you do get the choice, the very best time for meetings seems to be between 10 and noon, on weekdays, obviously, or between 2 and 4. And that's usually between Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, because on Mondays, a lot of times people have staff meetings, right? They have status updates early in the morning on Mondays. And a lot of times the same thing happens on Fridays. Consultants are wrapping up their work on Fridays and so forth. So where you can, between 10 and 12, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or right after, well, not right after lunch, but sometime after lunch. The problem is, if lunch is 12 to 1 and you call a meeting at 1 o'clock, people have eaten their lunch, they're kind of sleepy. You probably aren't going to get their best. Lunch meetings, that's an iffy one. If the purpose of the meeting is to try and bond a team, you bet. Lunch is terrific because people bond over food. If you really want to get some stuff done, lunch isn't always the best way to do it because people are busy eating lunch, right? And it's a more social activity, so it's a little more difficult to stay on task. Again, you don't always get the choice, but when you do get the choice, you should try to follow those guidelines. Okay, we've got time. Let's see what we need next. Oh yeah, we should probably figure out where we're going to do this. So the very best guideline for where to have a meeting is what's in the meeting's best interest. What is best for the meeting and for everybody in it? So if you need an awful lot of whiteboard, well, then you want to pick a meeting room where there's a lot of whiteboard, right? If you've got people coming in from all over the country or the world, maybe the best thing to do is to not have them come to headquarters or come to a central location. But if everybody's flying into Columbus, Ohio, maybe that's just not best. Maybe the right thing to do is to move the venue to Chicago, because it's way easier for people to fly into Chicago than it is to fly into Columbus. Or maybe, if you're having people fly into Atlanta and corporate headquarters is far away from the airport, maybe the right thing to do is to just take a meeting room at the airport, because that way people can fly in, they can meet, and then they can get back on their planes and go home. So the overriding thing that should guide that is what's best to fit the meeting's purpose, to fit the meeting's need, going to get you to the point of the meeting in the most efficient manner. Okay, so we've got who's coming, we've got time, we've got place. The next thing we have to do, obviously, is sort of the linchpin of all of this, which is to send out the meeting invitation. And this is really important because the way you want to send this out is you want to send out an invitation and say, okay, guys, for our meeting on Thursday, I've attached a draft agenda. I'd love for you all to look at it, give me your thoughts on, what's in it, what I haven't included that should be in it, what's there that maybe we don't need to discuss, maybe we don't need to spend 10 minutes on this, we can spend less time and maybe more time on this. You're asking for their involvement. And when you do that, what are you really doing? Think about that. What are you really doing when you send out a draft agenda and you're saying, give me your thoughts? What I'm doing is I'm making my meeting your meeting. By asking for your involvement, you take some ownership of the meeting now. And that's great, because if you have skin in the game, if you have ownership of the meeting, you're going to be a better participant. You're going to show up more prepared. You're going to be more participative in the meeting. You're going to be more vested in the outcome of the meeting. So that's really important. Send out the invitation. And then the last part of preparation is this thing that I call paper. Let people know what you need them to do. What do they need to read? What do they need to research? What websites do they need to visit? Who should they talk to before the meeting? Those sorts of things, so that your participants are better prepared. And then finally, with all that done, then you can distribute the final agenda. Guys, thanks very much. I'd asked for your, when I sent out the draft agenda, I had asked for your involvement. You guys gave me a lot of really good stuff, so I've cut this part from 15 minutes to 10 minutes, and I've invited this extra person who wasn't on the list because you said that, well, we can't really proceed without, somebody in engineering. And what you've done again is you've made people think that, I'm kind of driving, I'm guiding this meeting. My suggestions were incorporated. Okay, after that, then you got to run the meeting. And the start of that is you arrive early. And you arrive early for two reasons. The first reason is you really want to kind of have the room set the way you want it, right? The last thing you want to be doing is erasing furiously, stuff that has been left on the whiteboard and moving chairs around and so forth. Because if I'm the meeting leader and you come into my meeting and I'm doing all this, what do you think? Your expectations of the meeting go down a little bit, right? It's like, well, you don't really seem to be that prepared, right? So your expectations go down, and as a result, maybe your participation goes down as well. The other thing is, ostensibly, you're still the meeting leader. You've gotten people to take ownership of the meeting, which is great, but you're still the meeting leader, so you do in fact want to welcome people. Hey, thanks for coming, and so on and so forth. And then you want to start the meeting. Now, this changes from culture to culture, but in the United States and the United Kingdom, for the most part, not always, but for the most part, we try to be very focused on starting things on time, right? Other cultures do not do it the same way, so you're going to have to interpolate a little bit, what's happening. So in the United States, if it's a 10 a.m. meeting, it should start at 10 a.m. It should not start at 10:01. It should not start when everybody is in the room. It should not start when the senior person is in the room, if you're not the most senior person. I tell you what, if I was the most senior person and people were waiting around to begin the meeting until I showed up, I'm not a happy guy. I'm thinking about what your billable rates are, and I'm thinking, you're sitting here doing nothing? You're talking about, March Madness, and the clock is ticking. I mean, you guys should have started, and you should have caught me up when I came in. That's being efficient. So I'm not a happy guy if you're sitting around waiting for me. So the point is, start the meeting on time. Now again, there are cultural differences here. For example, in Japan, you really wouldn't start the meeting until the senior-most person had arrived, because that's part of the culture. So just be aware of that, okay? But in the U.S., we really like 10 a.m. meetings to start at 10 a.m., and so you should do that. So start your meetings on time, which, by the way, does another cool thing, right? Because if you become known as the person who starts, and we'll get to this, ends their meeting on time, this is good for your personal brand. It's like, I like going to his meetings or her meetings because I know when they're going to start, I know when they're going to stop. And that allows me to plan my day way better. The other thing it does, of course, is inevitably there's somebody who comes in sheepishly late. It's like, and they try to get real small, so that's like, I'm not here, nobody sees me, and they sit in their chair. That will stop that. People will start coming to your meetings on time because they know you will start your meetings on time. I'm always a big fan, unless it's a meeting that you have every week, of course. I'm always a big fan of introductions, because what an introduction in a meeting does is it essentially says, here's why I'm allowed to be here. Here's the value that I'm going to bring to this meeting. It allows me, the meeting leader, to understand who I have, but it also allows all the participants to say, oh, I get why everybody else is here. There is a critical mass. We've got good people who have the right background, the right responsibilities, the right decision-making capabilities, or whatever. This is going to be a productive meeting. And then the first thing you should do is you should restate the purpose and the point. Guys, we're here today to do this. We want to walk out of the meeting with this. So that, again, everybody is in alignment. And then after that, go through the agenda one more time. Yes, you've sent it out already, but go through it one more time just as a reminder of here's what we're going to cover and here's the order in which we're going to cover that. Then run the meeting, which means first, sometimes you need to set ground rules. It's like, guys, here are the ground rules. You can be critical of ideas, but you can't be critical of people. Or maybe you're not critical of ideas. I mean, if it's a brainstorming meeting, you should just get as many ideas out as quickly as possible without any editing by yourself or by anybody else. That step comes way later. Right now, I just want production, okay? So set the ground rules. You need to model behavior. If I'm throwing pieces of paper at people in the room, or if I'm not taking things seriously, I can't expect the rest of the meeting to take things seriously. And probably the most important thing that you can do as a meeting leader is ask good questions. Your job is not to talk. Your job is to ask questions, to poke, to probe, to get people to talk, and to talk not to you like it's an interview, but to talk to each other. That's when things start getting really good. When as a meeting leader, you can kind of push your chair back a little bit, and the meeting is now talking to each other in the meeting. So that's terrific. One of the hardest things that you're going to have to do, though, is as people are talking, it's not the time for you to talk, and it's not the time for you to endorse ideas or dismiss ideas. It's not the time for you to say, that's a good idea, because when you do that, there may be somebody in the meeting who's thinking, that's a stupid idea, but now they're not going to voice a criticism because the meeting leader, and you're still the meeting leader, has said that's a good idea, so I'm less likely to say anything. It works in reverse too. If I say, no, we tried to get more money, it doesn't work, I've just cut off a line of inquiry, just like that. What I should do is say, tell me more. I should poke and probe a little bit. It isn't the time for you to add your ideas either. Your ideas can be added later. Right now, the whole point of calling the meeting was to get the meeting's best thoughts, not my best thoughts. My best thoughts can come later, but right now I want your best thoughts. The other thing about meetings that I think is weird is so many meetings essentially are people sitting around a table looking down at their notepads, their iPads, their other tablets, their laptop, whatever. You should be visual. By all means, put stuff up on the wall. Use the whiteboard. Do different colors. Draw a mind map. Put a lot of ideas up on pieces of paper that are stuck to the wall, storyboard style. Be as visual as you can, because that allows people to kind of look at what's up and to make relationships, to see clustering, to see what kind of patterns come out and so forth. So as much as possible, be visual, and then finally have energy. If you're like this when you're having your meeting. The point is, if you don't have energy, the meeting isn't going to have any energy. Okay? And then finally end the meeting. Now, here's where you can summarize. About 10, 15 minutes before the meeting's about to wrap, this is where you can say, okay, guys, here's what I've heard us say so far. You can check for understanding. You can also do that as you're moving through the meeting, as you're going from meeting segment to meeting segment. Okay, here's what I've heard so far. Here's what I've heard so far, just to continue to check for understanding. But about 10, 15 minutes before it's time to end, and you want to be absolutely dead on. If you say the meeting's going to end at noon, at 11:59, you should be saying, okay, we're done. So summarize 10, 15 minutes before. Define what the next steps are. Here's what we're going to do coming out of this. Remember what your point is. Make sure you have achieved your point. We've got our map, or we've got our go, no-go decision, or whatever else. And this is a good time to set tasks, actions, timelines, responsibilities, while you've got everybody in the room. And in fact, the more you can get people to say, I'll take that on, the better, because the more likely they are to honor the commitment that they just made to the entire meeting. It's also a good time to set the next meeting, and it's afterwards you want whoever has been the official note taker to follow up with meeting notes. But again, I want to stress, you want to end the meeting on time. Nothing is more frustrating to anybody but especially senior people, than a meeting that's running late, because I have other stuff. Okay? I've got other stuff on my calendar. You running late on this meeting means I'm now going to be I'm going to miss the end of this, or I'm going to be late for the next meeting, which is going to make my whole day domino in a really unpleasant way. Okay? So that's the meeting step by step. Here's what I would suggest you do now. Discuss this among yourselves. So, there's other things you can discuss, but 3 big ideas would be, in your experience, what have you noticed as the biggest meeting problem? And, share a story or 2 with the rest of the group. The second thing would be, okay, the manager of the meeting, the facilitator, the leader, the team lead, whoever it was, how did they manage the problem? And do you think that was a good way to manage it or a bad way to manage it? What are the best practices that came out of that? What are the worst practices that came out of that? And then finally, okay, if you had it to do differently next time, what would you do differently next time? Okay? So have that discussion among yourselves, and I will see you for next class.